Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Pyatt and welcome to my YouTube channel. My goal is to help as many martial artists as possible in their journey and study of Bujutsu, whether you are a complete beginner or an experienced martial artist. I do weekly videos every Friday, so if you like and enjoy this video, please don't forget to subscribe to get loads more just like it. This video is the fifth and final part in a series looking at Hojo-undo Dai Ichi, and we're going to look at the fifth technique, which is Kake Tsuki. Now Kake means hooking block. Obviously uke technically means to receive from the verb ukeru, but obviously uke is mostly commonly translated as block. So Kake usually is translated as hooking block. The meaning of tsuki is thrust, and tsuki particularly refers to thrusts where your hands don't move up and down the bow. So for example, if you were to tsuki like in Sushi no Kon, the first bow kata, from here, this would be a tsuki because you're thrusting without really moving the hands. But you can also thrust in this way, which is usually referred to as nuki tsuki. So just subtle difference there. You can have different skis as well named by their target. So for example, you can have Geidan ski where you thrust towards the foot. You can have Maide ski where you come through from the stomach. So these are all variations, but ski fundamentally just means thrust. Okay. So for this movement, this is the first Hojo-undo that actually is a combination. And it's the only combination in Hojo-undo Dai Ichi. So we have two techniques, Kake and then tsuki. So for this one, we're going to start in exactly the same position and we're going to drop into the Kake. Okay, so let's break it down. So from this first movement, we're going to drop and we're going to hook by rotating the wrist and rotating the body so that it is narrow along the emitter. So you don't want to be here with the shoulders straight, you want the hips to turn this way. When you first learn the block, I would suggest doing it from a static position. So do it first of all from a neckwash stance. Now just as a point on the stance, neckwash stance is cat stance. The neckwash stance in Kobudo is quite often longer than what you would expect in karate. So in karate, usually you would have a much shorter, potentially, depending on the style, neckwash stance. Usually the foot is a lot higher. With Kobudo, particularly Matayoshi lineage in particular, the neckwash stance is a little bit longer, and you want to think of the front foot pulling in to the floor with the ball of the foot. So there's a lot of wonderful visual metaphors that come from Okinawa, and one that's quite useful for this is imagine that you're on the beach, and as you put your foot into the sand, you pull your foot back with the sand to create like a little bridge to push on. Now, I want to be clear, that isn't the meaning of the technique, but that is the metaphor and the image that you want to have when you're sort of getting into the stance. So it isn't this kind of sort of light, it's you're setting into the floor so you can push off that front foot, so that you can shift, or you can push very quickly backwards, or you can accelerate, or you can pivot. So you want to make sure the contact with the front foot isn't too light. The goal, because you have a long range weapon, is not really going to be to kick, unless of course you're flicking sand, which is different, which again if you were, you'd want to dig your foot into the sand first, so you can do that. But the feeling is to pull the foot into the floor. So we have a slightly longer and wider neckwash stance. There's less requirement to cover the groin because I'm at long range. Obviously if my opponent advances, then I need to adjust my stance and account for that. So, if we start from this position with our neckwash stance, think first of all, as the hand rotates, the shoulder is going to go in the opposite direction. So my shoulder is going to go this way, and my wrist is going to go this way. So one more time. So that I create this rotation in the body. My backhand wants to be at level with the hip, and I don't want it to drift away from my body. So one more time. When you do this, you really want to make an emphasis on the rotation of the wrist. It's important not to do this and not to push the wrist forward. Whilst this does have some merit in the fact that you have rotation to spin, what you don't want to do is push it towards your opponent because it presents a target. So you just want to rotate it tight towards the bow, keeping the hand in, rather than this. So it's the difference between that and this in terms of just the target. In both cases I have rotation where I can spin, but it's also important to remember, although my wrist has some natural flexibility, the actual rotation comes from my elbow, because my wrist isn't capable of rotating, it's my elbow that rotates. So by pulling the elbow in tight to the body, when I get the thrust, I still get as much rotation as I want without being in this position. With the tip of the bow, you don't want to take it too high. You want to keep it sort of level with the eyes. So here, obviously this would be too low, but this is too far up. And I'm presenting too much of a flat edge with the bow, that if my opponent presses in, it's going to compromise my balance. So from here, there. Now, the basic way of doing the ski from here is to keep the tip of the bow where it is. You want to bring your body up to the bow, so you don't ever want to do this and pull the bow back, because if I've got contact with the block and then I move the bow away, I've lost my initiative and my opponent's going to exploit that advantage all day. So I've blocked, I bring my body up to the bow. So I go into shikobachi, into horse stance. The bow is tight across the chest. We usually say along the nipple line. And then from there, I'm going to go from my horse stance, I'm going to rotate my hips and come through to the ski. The posture is very similar to Hojo-undo Dai Ichi, Naname, Shudan, Zenkuzachi, and forward. One thing that I think is important is that in some versions of Matayoshi, the posture, the hips aren't as straight, and the feet are narrower, and you get more press in the body, so you get more this much more side-on feeling, which does increase your range. And this is very much a Chinese feeling, Chinese influence. In more Japanese martial arts, I know obviously Okinawa is Japanese, but more mainland, in those it's more common for the hips to be a lot more square. And so my personal preference, because everything I do is Japanese bujutsu, whether it's Okinawan or whether it's mainland, to create consistency, I don't like that over-rotation, that overstretch, so I might keep my hips square. So at the end of the technique, I will always come here, as opposed to this, which is still obviously a powerful thrust, but it's a difference in posture, and that's my personal preference, but you might see both. Now, as I said, this 1, 2, 3 is a very good basic way of starting the technique, but then we want to move it on. So next what we want to do is, as we've come here, right, rather than keeping my hip loaded, so keeping it back and then forward, the next progression is that I want to generate more momentum with my body to shift forward. So instead I square the hip here, and I create this channel now with my hips that I can drive forward. So my entire body mass is going forward. So rather than generating all of my power through angular momentum, which is through the rotation of the hip, what I then begin to do is I begin to still use angular momentum through my shoulders and up torso, but I'm using linear momentum by driving my hips forward and coming in. So the effect then is that my body comes up with the bow and then takes it. A bit like if you've got a towel and it's relaxed and you go and pull, you have that moment of tension and then you get the whip going forward. So from here you have 1, 2, 1, 2. So that you get that little body shift. Right? Different teachers may have one preference or another, whether they prefer to do the fix and rotate, or whether they prefer to drive. So whatever your instructor says, I suggest you follow their example. But be aware that there's the two variations, but both of them have the common point that you don't want to pull the bow back. You need to keep the tip of the bow always threatening. Your opponent should feel under pressure. He shouldn't feel like he's going to relax, like he can chill out during the technique. There's a point just with the feet on this, If we start from this position, we can just drop forward. Some systems will just start incline straight away and then we'll step and then we'll come through. Both are perfectly acceptable. But obviously, in this series we've focused static. We've not really thought about going too far forward and backwards yet. We're just thinking about the basic movements. I hope you found that useful, and feel free to have a review of all of the videos in Hojo-undo Dai Ichi. These 5 techniques are fundamental and key. There's a lot of similarity between them, but the most importantly, they teach you the correct body dynamics that you're going to utilise in lots of other techniques later. When you move on to Hojo-undo Dai Ni and Hojo-undo Dai San, you will see an increase in the number of combinations, just like this technique. And so it's important, therefore, that the foundations, those individual techniques, are correct, because they'll have a direct influence on the techniques we will look at next, which will then inform Kata. So remember, Kihon, Kata, Kumite, each one informs each other. Obviously with Kobudo, we talk about Hojo-undo Kata, Kumite, or Kumibo in this example. So I hope you enjoyed this video. You can check out the other videos in this series by clicking the link here, and you can check out the first Kata, Shushinakan, by clicking the link here. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you did, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.